All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first hour of the show. Right now, we head off to Tupelo, Mississippi. And that's actually, of course, the birthplace of Elvis Presley back in January of 1935. And our guest is a writer of a book and had a long career in law enforcement, drug enforcement in particular. We have him on the phone with us right now. We welcome him aboard, and that is Merle Temple. Hello, Merle. How are you?
Great, Roger. Glad to be here.
Very much glad to have you with us as well. Your book, we'll talk a little bit about the book at first, and then get into some of what had happened to you in real life as well, and then back to the book as well. But it is a novel, but based on a lot of actual things that occurred, I assume. A Ghostly Shade of Pale, which is a great title, by the way. What does the title mean to you?
Well, we start with that title all the way. You know, many things change when you have a concept for a book, and as you write a big book like Ghostly is, with so many threads in it, and covers a history that people think they know, but they really probably don't. And I am blessed or cursed, depending on your point of view, because I'm a music aficionado, and I'm 66 years old, and I will tell you, Roger, there are days that I may not be able to tell you what my name is, but I can sing you all the lyrics to a song I haven't heard in 50 years. And the jukebox of my mind plays constantly with all these millions of song lyrics, it seems. And one song that I liked that just inspired me for the title for this book was A Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum, and because it fit, and the villain in this book, in addition to being a psychopath, he also suffers from albinism, so he is a ghostly shade of pale.
I got you. Very good. Now, that's interesting about that, because, you know, a lot of us with music, certain songs take us back not only to a time in our life, but to certain very specific experiences as well. And do certain songs, besides the one you just mentioned, come out in your mind every now and then when you hear them, and immediately it takes you back to a certain event in law enforcement that you experienced?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Music, I think, is very important as a backdrop for writers and novels and, of course, movies. And it does serve to kind of transport people in kind of a time machine to a certain time and place. And since you mentioned Elvis, of course, here in the birthplace of Elvis, you know, Elvis is all around here in this town, a memory around every corner, it seems. And that was the first concert that I went to that really started the whole love of music. My mother took me to see Elvis in 1956. At the Tupelo Fair here, the Mississippi Alabama Fair and Dairy Show, which was a huge deal in that time. It was, you know, the big entertainment event of the year, every year, that people look forward to. And, you know, I can still remember that, although I was only 8. You know, it was made quite the impression on me. And there's a distinct Elvis thread that's woven into A Ghostly Shade of Pale. And because this book is set in Mississippi, particularly mostly from Tupelo, Oxford, North Mississippi, up to Memphis and Beale Street. And Elvis, and he cast a shadow over many things, but particularly here in the South, his shadow was cast across everything. And you know, a lot of the Elvis fans, and the Elvis world is still huge all around the world. And they liked this book, and an author of a book about Elvis, who was a friend of his, told me that when she read certain parts of the book involving Elvis, she cried.
It's interesting that you incorporated that into your book, because I guess that Tupelo and Elvis are kind of synonymous with a lot of people in a lot of people's minds as well.
Well, they sure are. And when we went to Hollywood. We were invited to Hollywood last year, which was quite an adventure. And when my wife and I were driving through Beverly Hills, we were looking all around and like 2 country bumpkins, you know, come to town, and I told her, I said, you know, we are the Beverly Hillbillies. All we're missing is the truck and a rocking chair up on top, you know, where Granny was sitting. And but when I was out there, I was interviewed on KKLA for an hour, and so they played an Elvis song, surprised me, as bumper music from coming back from one of the breaks, and met a lot of people out in Hollywood who asked me if I would say thank you very much.
Of course, and you got that lilt down pretty good there. Merle, your career was in Mississippi with the Bureau of Narcotics, which was established there back about the time that you got involved, right?
Yeah, Just a Sheet of Pale is written as fiction, but it's based on events, or loosely based in some cases, on things that happened to me and to my friends back in those days. Just as I was coming out of Ole Miss in the early 70s, President Nixon had declared the first official war on drugs, and they were ramping up, doing major reorganizations of agencies at the federal level, and states were rushing to pass similar legislation to mirror what they were doing with the new Drug Enforcement Administration. And Mississippi did that too, and they passed legislation and created the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics, and I was recruited into that as an agent, first as an undercover agent, then an investigator, supervisor, and eventually the first captain. And I was young and naive and wet behind the ears and had no idea really what I was getting into. And so when I was an undercover agent, which is detailed fictionally in the book, I was working solo undercover in South Mississippi, and I was taken hostage by 2 heroin dealers who just decided that they wouldn't complete the heroin deal. They had a better idea that they would just kill me, take my money, and keep their product. And so it was a terrible experience, and I listened to them debate about where they would dump my body. After they'd kill me, I watched them actually eat double-edged Gillette razor blades, bite them, chew them into, swallow them, blood gushing out and bubbling up at the corners of their mouths, laying down on their throat, swallowing fire. After that, it was pretty bizarre. And later, when I was an investigator, I met 2 contract killers who lured me out near Memphis to assassinate me in a standoff. And then my men and I, when I was later captain, they had a sniper on a railroad trestle behind a clump of trees who was covering a deal that we were doing. And when we went to arrest their Confederates, they opened fire on us and just rained fire down on us, and it was a terrible gun battle ensued, and people were wounded, and so, you know, it wasn't quite how they told us it would be at Ole Miss, and nothing against Ole Miss, but you know, when you get out and get your feet wet and find out what the world is really like, sometimes it's just not quite as orderly and neat as you're told it might be. Boy,
what you just said, that was kind of like onion fields in a way, is what it reminds me of a little bit. The Joseph Wamba novel that was, book, and it was based on the true case, of course, and then made into a film. Yours, in Mississippi there, you survived those incidents. That in itself is pretty amazing, how you got away, I guess, right?
Yeah, I remember Wamba, and actually they called us the New Centurions, you know, based on another book that he did when we were coming out of college and being recruited into law enforcement to raise the level of professionalism. And of course, Onion Fields, you know, was a famous book too. And I enjoyed his books in the early days and back during that time. Yeah, it was a different time then. It was the Wild West, as some people call it. And if you got in trouble in the early days, especially undercover, the cavalry wasn't coming because there was no cavalry. There were very few of us, and we were kind of making it up as we went, flying by the seat of our pants, and had to think pretty fast at times, you know, when we were confronted with dangerous situations when people would say, well, I think you're the man, and so forth, and all those classes and psychology and role playing and all of that, they came in handy, and so it was a different time, and much different than it is now, because we were young, the war on drugs was young, we had high hopes at first, what we could do, and before we realized that there was just so much money involved, and if you took out one organization, you thought there would be some relief if you did, but there were always 3 or 4 or 5 ready to step right in and take their place, because, again, like I said, there just was so much money, and when, a state or a country is awash with that kind of money, it's going to filter down and begin to corrupt government also at all levels, and we certainly saw that, and always had to be wary of everybody. It was kind of like the X-Files, where he says, "Trust no one, Mr. Mulder," and it was kind of that way then, and some of that's reflected in the book. Some people who should have been friends turned out to be our worst enemies, and at times really tried to undo us.
Well, and you just brought up another key factor, I believe, that's involved with your book as well. Not only drug enforcement and the stories that you have there, but also politics and politicians. I want to get into that as well. We're going to take a break, and then we'll be back with a great deal more with the story of A Ghostly Shade of Pale. I'm Roger Galloway. We have on the telephone with us right now Merle Temple, who has written this incredible book called A Ghostly Shade of Pale. By the way, speaking of Elvis, I saw in Las Vegas over the weekend $1 Million Quartet, about the meeting at Sun Records in Memphis with Jerry Lee Lewis and Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, and Elvis Presley. What a great show that is. Have you ever seen that, Merle?
I haven't seen that yet, but some of my friends have, and they all rave about it, and look forward to seeing it. I've seen all of those guys, the real guys, when they were live. I've seen them all in concert.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of working with 2 of them on 2 television shows I produced, and that was phenomenal in itself, Carl Perkins and Johnny Cash. So it was a great opportunity in my life, that's for certain. Very iconic and great musicians, both of them. Well, I want to ask you about, a little more specifically, if you would, about the plot of A Ghostly Shade of Pale.
Well, Ghostly, as I said, is written as fiction, but really based on things that happened to me. And when Michael Parker is the key central character in the book, based on me, when he leaves Ole Miss and is recruited into the First War on Drugs and goes into the Bureau and experiences all of these harrowing things and traumatic things and loss and danger and just all the elements that cry out to you, as many reviewers have said about this book. And it just chronicles his rise in that time period, which was, I think, a great time period for an author to write about, because there was so many divergent things that were colliding on the same stage at once. The war on drugs, social unrest, and the end of the Vietnam War was winding down, a sudden mistrust in government, that came about related to Watergate, and it was just, the deaths of assassinations of political and social leaders, and I think it was just a unique time in our history, and I think some of the roots of what we see today, in some ways can still be traced back to that. And of course, in this book, also you see corrupt politicians who will stop at nothing for power. The absolute power that corrupts absolutely, as Lord Acton said, and we certainly saw that. And there's and it's definitely a Southern book. It's a book of Mississippi and a book of the South. When I was in Hollywood interviewing on Media Mayhem with Allison Hope Weiner, Allison asked me, she said, what is it in Mississippi? Is it something in the water, all these great writers that are coming out of Mississippi? And I said, well, I think, we have a real tradition here of oral storytelling, and that being passed down from generation to generation, and I think that's certainly a part of it. And in the book, Pearl, who is Michael's grandmother, certainly is that source of history and continuity and unconditional love for him. And Pearl is based on my grandmother, Pearl, who I kept her real name. And I promised Pearl 57 years ago that I would never forget her, like that was possible. And so I also keep that promise in this book, which makes it extra special to me, as well as trying to honor those that I work with, some who are still with us, some are not. One of my men was shot and killed at 25 in a very traumatic time for us, so that's also fictionalized in the book. And so we got to discuss many of those things when we went out to Hollywood. Michael Parker's search to find himself, to find God, to understand his place in the world and the universe, when a lot of his naivete is kind of stomped on and shattered. And so Criminal Minds in Hollywood read the manuscript before the book came out, and Jim Clemente, their writer and one of their producers, and the former FBI profiler, who passes on everything that goes on the air for authenticity, called and told me, he said, you're not only a great writer, you're a great writer of American literature. I want to represent you in Hollywood, and he invited us to come out, and that was a big boost for us when we really needed it, especially for the confidence of a first-time author. So we went out to Hollywood and signed for the cast of Criminal Minds, had dinner with and signed for the cast of Major Crimes, had an hour on KKLA, did a big signing there in Brea, California, and set some records there, and then we went down to Culver City and had dinner with the producers of Saving Private Ryan and The Patriot and some of those big blockbusters, and had a long dinner with them to talk about Ghostly and the possibility of its adaptation to film. And so it's been quite a whirlwind for us. And we came out of Southern California and went up to Las Vegas, and I'd like to say hi to my friends in Henderson, because we signed at Barnes & Noble in Henderson and set new records there for an author signing. And now my friend at Criminal Minds has agreed to write the screenplay for Ghostly, because I had dinner with Morgan Freeman about 5 weeks ago, and we've talked, and so we want to take the screenplay back to him in a format that he likes to read.
Now, I assume that you're interested in him, and he's interested in playing one of the key roles in it. Is the lead, or is it one of the leads?
Well, we have a role in it I think would be perfect for Morgan. It's a nightclub owner on Beale Street in Memphis. He's not a good guy, but he's not totally a bad guy. He's kind of reformed, and he forms a kind of a friendship and has a certain kind of affection for this young narcotics agent, Michael Parker. And it's a role that has a lot of depth to it, and I think he would be perfect for that.
It sounds like is it like a gritty story? Like, I think of like True Detectives, which I thought was very good with Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, which was got loads of critical raves. As a matter of fact, has that kind of a feel that the way you describe yours has. Would that be correct or no?
Yeah, that would be accurate. Some of the reviews we've gotten have said that it's gritty. I've gotten emails from people in Australia and different places that told me that the villain in the book gave them nightmares, and they called it riveting. And we just had a a flurry over the holidays. For some reason, it's much welcomed. A lot of people were barbecuing around the South and reading while they were cooking, kicking back with their copy of Ghostly Shade of Pale. Some on the beach down at Destin sent me pictures of them reading the book on the beach, and all the responses we get from readers and from reviewers have all been very good and very generous and much appreciated.
All right, we're going to take another break. We have a great deal more we want to talk to you about in regards to the book, and also with what you accomplished in law enforcement as well. I'm Dr. Galloway. On the telephone with me right now is Merle Temple, who's written this book called A Ghostly Shade of Pale. It's gotten some rave reviews and a lot of reaction in a very positive way from Hollywood as well. I wanted to ask you, if I would, you were involved in law enforcement for a long time in the state of Mississippi, working with Bureau of Narcotics, and this term we hear over and over and over, and we've had for years and years and years and years, is the war on drugs. Is it really going anywhere? I mean, seriously, do you think anything is actually being accomplished much, or is this just going to go on forever?
Well, that could be a whole show unto itself. I think, like I said, we learned early on that trying to stop it was like trying to dam up the Mississippi River with a shovel. It was almost hopeless. And if you define that to be winning, then the war has not been won. And there have been a lot of consequences, unintended consequences, to the war, and a lot of collateral damage all around. And prisons have been backed up, sometimes with very low-level offenders, people who are really not much of a threat to anyone, but given long draconian sentences. And when the Sentencing Reform Act was passed at the federal level, it did away with parole, and they began to have long mandatory sentences. The way they calculated the guidelines for sentencing were arbitrary and subject to manipulation. So you wound up with some really low-level dealers who wound up with 20 and 30-year sentences, and it's just not an effective use of resources. And like I said, I could go into that and talk about that for a couple of hours probably. And I think sometimes you just have to back up and assess where you've been and ask, was it worth it, and is there a better way? And I think that's probably where we are, and probably long overdue to ask that question.
Well, the other thing that comes to mind is the title of your book itself, A Ghostly Shade of Pale. Made me think also of when you're dealing with war on drugs, the things have often been portrayed as black and white, rather than shades of gray. Along comes Breaking Bad, and you have an anti-hero, bad guy, good guy, does end up getting killed off at the end, but it was a super successful series, and the whole thing about drugs was depicted in a different way, showing this common guy who was a teacher and needed money badly, etc., etc. Did you find that to be true, too, in your law enforcement activity, that there would be shades of gray on both sides?
Oh, sure. Yeah, when I came out of, matter of fact, when I first came out of college and was working at a bureau, someone wrote an article in a newspaper about me, and they said that I reminded them of the code of the Old West, where right was right and wrong was wrong, and there was no stretch of gray in between, and I would have to plead guilty. And but you find out as you move along that like I said, it's not quite that neat and orderly in the world, and there are circumstances that will lead you to reconsider what your kind of absolute stance on this or that issue. And not that you condone some of the things that were done by in any way, but you just have to stop back and say, what are the costs, and is it worth it? Is there a better way? And how can we accomplish what we're trying to accomplish without injuring perhaps so many innocents, who are involved along the way? And I think that's where some of us came to, and when you just have to be there and see it all to get a grasp of it, how it really is. And I think very few people know really just exactly what goes on. And but what I did want to say too, that Ghostly is the first in a trilogy based on my life. And when I left law enforcement, because I got crossways with a corrupt governor, I went into the corporate world and then into high-level politics. And the sequel to Ghostly that picks Michael Parker up from the end of Ghostly and takes him into a rented world, the next book, that will be out this fall, probably in late October, early November. And then the third book should be out sometime next year.
Now, the book itself, A Ghostly Shade of Pale, as you pointed out in the previous segment, Hollywood is very interested in this. You've got a writer who is going to, planning on doing the screenplay. By the way, what other things has he done? Has he done other scripts?
But yeah, he writes for Criminal Minds, and for some other specials they do out there. And when he was a first responder, Jim was at Ground Zero, 9/11, and he got cancer from that, like so many of them did, because they didn't have the proper filters and were breathing all those carcinogens, and he got very sick, had to have a bone marrow transplant. But he actually helped them set up the series Criminal Minds, and then when he retired early, he went to Hollywood, and he's done very well there, and just has his fingers in a lot of pies out in Hollywood. And what a friend, Jim Committee has been to us. Just couldn't be more gracious to us when we went out there, and just opened up a lot of doors for us. And just hate that we live so far apart, but we do talk fairly regularly.
Any chance that you might consider moving out that way or at least maybe staying there part-time, or no?
No, I think I just visit. I think this is home for me, and I kind of feel like Louis Cruzard did. He wrote a book once that I paraphrase now and then when I'm out on the road for a long time. And to paraphrase his book, which I say, if I ever get back to Mississippi, I'm going to nail my feet to the ground. And it was Georgia in his case, but that's kind of how I feel. And born here, and I have so many people here that I care about. But I think we'll probably go back to Hollywood and have a long, extended tour next time, and would like to, come through some of those areas that we visited before, out through Kingman and Henderson and Vegas and Barstow, and just
hey, maybe you'd make it over to Lake Havasu as well, with the London Bridge.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come out there and do a signing. I tell you, it's a blessing for me. I love to meet people, and I never meet a stranger. You probably can tell. And I love to engage people and to talk with them, not just to quickly in a few seconds sign a book and that somebody thrust in front of me and I hand it to them and they're gone. I want to see people and talk to each one of them for a little bit and hear their stories and share my stories with them as much as I can when we have long lines to sign books. And going back on this book tour also has given me a chance to say one of two things to people I'm reunited with from the old days, either thank you or I'm sorry. And they never remember what you're thanking them for or what you're sorry for. And I tell them, well, that doesn't matter because I do, and I've been given this gift to come back and to talk about it. And we see so many agents and other people that we knew, and sometimes it's very tender and tearful in some of these reunions, and so it's just this is much more than a book tour does.
Well, A Ghostly Shade of Pale, again, is the name of the book. It's available on Amazon, and it is set in the 70s, and the way you've been talking about it, it's very much a part of the 70s and the Mississippi milieu at that time, et cetera, et cetera. And you said at the beginning that you're a music aficionado. Is that true as well with the book? Are there various songs that pop up, or is that something you see in the movie that becomes part and parcel of the story?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, the first publisher we had, they weren't quite so sure why I was including so many songs that they didn't know because they were much younger. And I said, well, it's the flavor of the times. And I said, there are a lot of people who know these songs who will like this book and recognize them, and it will take them back, and it gives some authenticity to that moment where a character is at a certain place, and the songs play on the radio or on the jukebox. And I said, besides that, I said, if the movie's ever made, we've already got our soundtrack laid down. One of the first quotes in my second book that I'm trying to finish now, the preface, is I quote Carl Perkins in one of his songs. He said it's almost dawn and the cops are gone. Let's all get Dixie fried.
Very good. This book, by the way, when you sat down to write it, did you know where it was going to go in general? You had that general story in mind, or did it take off kind of on its own?
Yeah, I had kind of the framework of it because, again, it's based on truth. And so I kind of sketched that out, stayed with the title all the way through, never changed that. Many things changed in a book because I was self-taught as a novelist. I'd written things all my life, and people said I had a gift. But writing a novel I found was pretty hard. But I sketched it out, and we worked through it again and again. And then I thought it wasn't very good when I had the first draft, and then I saw that what I needed to do was to add descriptors, because I thought the characters were flat and lifeless, and when I did, went back through, they began to pop up off the page, and you could see what they saw and hear what they heard and feel what they felt, and that's a common thread in all of our reviews, including one we recently got out of England, crime fiction lovers who love the book, and they all say it's very visual, like reading a movie, and that's the common denominator in all the reviewers that we see and the readers. They say, so visual, I was right at the foot of the action. One said, I laughed out loud, I cried out loud, and it was over much too soon.
It's interesting, probably advice 101 given to young writers is to write what you know, and you've done this here as well with the characters and the experiences of what you actually went through in your life back in the 70s.
Yeah, it's easy. I mean, these forums, they ask people, authors sometimes, where's your inspiration come from? And some say, well, I meditate a lot, or I have a vivid memory. And they get around to me and they say, what about you? And I say, I just remember.
Now, what about, I assume you're married. Your wife, how does she feel about all of this?
Well, I'm married again. My first wife, who lived through the ghostly days, has passed away. And my current wife, Judy, says she didn't know she could live through the ghostly days or not, where she was friends with my first wife, Susan. But she loves it, and she loves traveling with me and taking names and getting the books ready to sign, and she loves to meet people like I do. So we're just having more fun probably than two people in their mid-60s should be allowed to have.
All right. Let's see if we still have. We have a call here. Let's take the call. Just a moment. Yes, caller, you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, you have a question?
I understand the program is about Play It Like You Mean It.
No. You called an hour early. If you would call in the next hour, if you would, please.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right,
Bye-bye.
thank you. She's calling about our next guest who's coming on here in shortly. Well, I want to thank you very much for being on, Merle. The book absolutely sounds phenomenally good. and you can get it. Everybody can get it a number of different places, but certainly one of them is Amazon. A Ghostly Shade of Pale. And I can tell you really feel very good about this book, and I'm certainly very gratified by the great reviews you've gotten as well.
Well, it's been overwhelming, because when you write a book, especially your first one, you work on it so long, you kind of get sick of it, and you don't know if it's any good or if you should burn all copies and do mankind a favor. But when these things start pouring in, and they've never ceased, it's overwhelming, and when people write you and tell you what the book means to them and how they round a bend with Michael Parker and all of his trials and challenges, and it's a big love story in this book too, and women give us actually our best reviews, but they tell you they round a bend with Michael, and they bump into themselves from long ago, and they didn't know anybody ever felt that way but them. When you get those kind of notes that just come in, all the time, it's a humbling thing.
All right. Well, listen, let's stay in touch, and you make your way out west the next time. Hopefully we'll bump into each other, have you on the show again in person instead of on the telephone, all right?
Oh, I love that.
All right, Merle Temple, and again, the book is A Ghostly Shade of Pale, available through Amazon.